Okay, so it was a big week in markets last week. We finally started to see a little bit of volatility with the Nasdaq painting what has in recent months been a very rare red candle on the weekly, Bitcoin pulling back with it. And I suppose the key question now is, are we putting in a market top? And is everything I've been talking about for the last 8 months about to play out? Or is this just a very, very minor pullback en route to a blow off top in equities and Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency market? If you're interested in my view and what I think the charts are telling us from a technical perspective, then do stay tuned. And over the next half an hour, I'm going to whiz you through charts for the Nasdaq, Netflix, the Hang Seng index in China, and then on to what I believe those charts are telling us about the cryptocurrency market and where Bitcoin is likely to end up over the next couple of years. The clue for what's about to come is in this chart. I believe that we are about to put in a historic top and we're about to see a major pullback in markets. And if you want to know why, then please do stay tuned. If you find any of this content useful, then please do smash the subscribe and the like buttons and help me grow the channel. I massively appreciate your support, guys. We are edging closer. We're about halfway to 1,000 subscribers on this channel. And if you like what I do, then please head over to X and follow me through @PartTimeCharts, the part-time trader being my name that I often post interesting charts and analysis under. Right, thank you for coming back. If you're somebody who's regular, and welcome. If you haven't seen any of my videos before, goes without saying, but none of this is financial advice. So just to be clear, before you dive deep into this video, if you've got an investment thesis, I suggest you do your own research and do not listen to a random anonymous guy on the internet. But if you find any of this entertaining, informative, useful in helping you to shape a view on the markets, then please, like I say, please do hit the subscribe button. Let's dig into the Nasdaq chart to get started. So last week I mentioned it was quite rare for us to see a red candle, and just look at this price action. You know, since the market bottomed violently back at the beginning of April, you know, the market has pretty much been in up only mode. So this wasn't a huge pullback in the grand scheme of things. You know, on the weekly, the Nasdaq was down two and a bit percent. But, you know, we have engulfed the last weekly candle, and we've started to see a pullback as we run into resistance at the top of what could be a megaphone top pattern. Interestingly, I think we're also starting to see that price is starting to backtest this channel that broke back in February of this year, which, you know, if you remember going back to some of my analysis back here, I've said for a long time that this kind of bouncing pattern where price comes into the bottom of this rising channel is not sustainable and is an unstable structure that would ultimately lead to a pretty significant correction. And that's just a small part of my analysis on why I think markets are likely topping out rather than just getting started. It's really interesting because last week was the first time in months, and I mean going all the way back into late 2024, that I started to entertain the possibility of more upside for markets. And it did cross my mind. I posted a couple of times on X that we might be about to see some sort of blow off top on the Nasdaq, and I can talk you through that in the next chart, why I started to think that might be a possibility. I was looking at Nasdaq versus gold and thinking, actually, am I on the wrong side here being bearish? But on balance, I think that there are lots of reasons to be bearish. Some of those are fundamental, some of those are technical, and you can go back and see some of my analysis on the inversion of the yield curve that I've covered in previous videos and what that tells us, the state of the bond market, which I think is in dire straits at the moment. I do believe that we are about to put in a historic top. I believe that equities are massively overvalued, and I suspect price will kind of drift around here for a few weeks before ultimately rolling over. But my first target, you know, given this broken channel to the upside, given the fact that we've backtested it and it's held as resistance now, given the fact that we are painting this sort of megaphone top on the Nasdaq, I think there are some pretty strong signs that this could be the end for markets, and that ultimately, when the next couple of months are done, we might see markets begin to roll over. And I've been saying for a long time, guys, that tops in markets are complex. They take time to form. I know people were excited about this as a potential V bottom, and there were lots of people that were making comparisons with the kind of V bottom that we saw back here in 2020 during the COVID crisis, where as the market bounced out, it never looked back and price just drove higher and higher for months, probably about 18 months after making new highs, until eventually the market topped out and started to correct in 2022. So lots of people were drawing analogies between this price action here and what we've seen here, and expecting the market to push up. And as I say, last week was the first time that I actually started to entertain that as a possibility. But given the pullback at resistance, given what I'm seeing in some of the other charts, and I'll come on to those in a moment, particularly in Chinese equities, I think there are some pretty strong reasons to believe that this is the major top that I've been looking for. And that just as everybody is complacent, everybody is celebrating the gains that they've made over the last 6 months or so, I think, probably not 6 months, probably 4 months or so, I think there is probably a decent chance that we are about to experience the first major leg down and the first lower high potentially into early 2026 for the bear market that is about to come. And if you look at the Nasdaq from an even higher time frame perspective, so this is the sort of weekly price action that I'm seeing play out. If you look at this, I keep drawing parallels between the kind of price action that we saw into the dot-com bubble that popped in the year 2000 and where we are now. And that is that price for a long time has been bouncing off this trendline support, which every time we've hit it, including at the bottom of the 2022 correction, price is driven significantly higher. But ultimately, a bit like this channel, the more times one of these support lines gets tapped, the more likely it is to break. And if that support line is a multi-year trend, as it is here, where you've got for 2 years price consistently bouncing off of the bottom boundary of this rising channel, when that eventually breaks, given the length of time that we've spent with this as support, the correction that you can expect afterwards, in my view, particularly given some of the fundamental reasons that I've mentioned in some of my previous videos, gives me reason to believe that this might be the top that all the bears fear, and that all the bulls fear, and that bears like myself will ultimately celebrate when it finally happens. And if that's the case, using that analogy of a sort of bouncing ball across this trend line, when this eventually breaks, given that this trend line dates all the way back to 2010, a break of this trend line would be absolutely massive. And I don't think it's going to survive another tap. I think the next time we come down and retest this trend line, it is going to give way. And I suspect that will open the doors for the next major support, which I see over the next couple of years being down here in the sort of $6,000 region for the Nasdaq. So that's huge, right? We're talking about a 70% correction over the next 2 years, if I'm right. And I believe in that scenario, cryptocurrency gets absolutely torn apart. Bitcoin will fall 95% plus, and altcoins will get absolutely destroyed. And we're going to come on to that in a moment, because I think there are also reasons to believe that there's confluence in the crypto market for this view that the Nasdaq is topping out. So like I say, last week I did start to entertain the idea, and I knew at the time that I would regret posting some of those charts, but I did start to entertain the idea that maybe we were going to get the kind of blow off that we saw here in 2000, 99, 2000. And the moment I did that, I could see, like I say, that I would regret posting those charts, because I think there are some pretty strong signs that we're topping out here, and that ultimately the Nasdaq is a much bigger, more mature player now than it was back in 99, 2000, and so it's a lot harder to generate the kind of vertical price action that saw price double in the space of a year for the Nasdaq, and that really famous dot-com bubble that eventually ended with, look at this, 15 years of the market going sideways before it made new highs. So I suspect if this is a top, it's going to be really, really significant. I think the market is going to drive price back into the $6,000 region. And when it does, I don't think we're going to bounce back overnight, guys. I mean, look at what happened here. The market bottomed in 2002. and it was 2016 before we saw new highs. And from a psychological perspective, this makes sense, right? Because what happens in these bubbles is that everybody becomes overconfident and people start to put more and more of their wealth in stocks. And that's, what drives this kind of price action, or the kind of huge bounces that we've seen in equities in recent years. I mean, just look at this, from 10,000 back in 2023 up into 22,000 in 2025. In the space of less than 2 years, the prices of the Nasdaq has more than doubled. And that is a sign, in my view, just one sign that people are feeling really confident investing in US equities at the moment. But ultimately, what happens is when that liquidity gets sapped out of the market and people get burned by buying the top of a giant move like this, their confidence is shot to pieces. And what you see is people don't return to the markets for many, many years until you start to see price driving much higher once it breaches the previous high. So I suspect we'll come down into $6,000, and I imagine it will be at least 5 to 10 years before you see price trading back at these highs of 22,000 on the Nasdaq. And here's a little bit of compliment. So one of the charts that I've been really confident on for such a long time is Netflix. I just think this price action is so clean. You've got this upper boundary of this sort of broadening pattern, this megaphone pattern, which sometimes can be a topping pattern, other times can be consolidation before a much bigger move higher. I think in this case, this is about consolidation before we get the real move in Netflix in the 2030s. But if you look at how clean this trend line is, we've got resistance, resistance, resistance. And what surprised me is I did expect the market to top out here a couple of months ago, back in May, June, but it actually tipped over this trend line and recently got back under. And the fact that we're back under and we're back within the boundaries of this megaphone pattern gives me reason to believe that we are seeing proper weakness in the market, and this move to the downside is likely to be sustained. So I can see this dragging sideways for a few weeks, but ultimately I expect this uptrend, which dates back to 2022, to give way, and for that to lead to a much bigger correction. And just look at the size of this move, right? I mean, if I'm right, and this is going to pull back from here, we're talking about a 90% decline, the kind of decline that we saw at the end of the dot-com boom, when the bubble popped and people realized that some of those companies were wildly overvalued, and not all of them bounced back. And it's, definitely possible that Netflix never bounces back to the kind of region that we've seen here. But I suspect that over the coming years, what we'll see is a massive decline, potentially a few years of sideways movement before price comes back into the all-time highs and beyond in the 2030s. So I think if we are lucky enough to get this pullback, lots of people will be really depressed. I personally will be rubbing my hands with glee, because if we get the kind of move that sees price retrace 90%, I will absolutely be a buyer down here. And for those of you who think this is impossible, you only have to look back here. The 2022 correction, which saw the Nasdaq retrace by about 30%, I believe, saw Netflix fall 76% during that time. So is it impossible that if the Nasdaq is putting in a major historic top and is about to decline by 75%, is it impossible that some of these stocks that have seen huge upside in recent years just completely unwind and see the kind of declines that we haven't seen in tech stocks for 25 years? I believe it is, and I think there are lots of other charts that look like this, Meta being one of them, and you can see some of those on my X feed at Part-Time Charts. But like I say, the key thing to take away here is that it looks like we've got back inside the boundaries of this megaphone pattern, and I suspect that means that shortly it's good night for Netflix, and this thing is going to decline way further than anyone can really imagine. And here's a little bit of extra confluence for you. So one of the charts that last week led me to start believing that perhaps we were going to see some sort of blow off top is that the HSI index, the Hang Seng index in China, started to poke its head above this downtrend and above this key support and resistance level here, and above this broken uptrend, which had previously been backtested as resistance. And you can see just how much confluence there is here. So we've got big SR level downtrend here, and the broken uptrend that is being backtested as resistance. And as we started to poke through on the lower time frames, I thought, wow, if this really does break out, this is going to, rapidly appreciate to the upside. But it's a lesson for me and for anyone else in this space. If you're looking at the monthly chart, then do wait for the monthly close. Don't get drawn in to what's happening on the daily or even the weekly time frame, because ultimately at the end of the month, what we saw was price slam back down. And again, it looks like this broken uptrend is now holding as resistance once again. This SR zone is doing the same, and we're being rejected off the upper boundary of what looks like a descending broadening wedge. And so you can see here that I'm forecasting that this will pull back quite significantly, and we will come back potentially to the bottom boundary of this descending broadening wedge, retest this key support and resistance zone, which has been my ultimate target for the Hang Seng for quite some time, about 12,000. And that will be an incredible buying opportunity on Chinese stocks, in my opinion. And in a future video, I will post some of the charts that I've developed, which chart the Chinese indexes against gold and against the US indexes like the Nasdaq and the S&P. And I think over a long enough time period, these are going to look really, really good. I think this is going to bounce back stronger and harder and faster than US equities will. And if we see a pullback into this region here, which takes us back to prices on Chinese stocks that we haven't seen since 2008, and basically means we're flat since 1993, I think that is a major, major buying opportunity. And this chart is telling me that in the long run, Chinese equities are going to be incredibly bullish and deliver really significant life-changing returns to people. But in the short term, I think it's, the Hang Seng is going to suffer just like the US equities will in a major, major financial crisis led by the bond market and the collapse of global debt markets. So that's my view on equities. And let's take a look at what that means for cryptocurrency. So I wanted to start with the Coinbase chart this week from a cryptocurrency perspective, because this chart has really annoyed me, I'm going to be honest. So we've got this downtrend here, right? And the reason it's annoyed me is that I expected price to eventually be rejected from this downtrend and come back and revisit the bottom of what I thought at the time would be some sort of descending broadening wedge. But what happened was price poked its head above and then got back under, and simultaneously broke this uptrend that we've seen here. And at that point, once we had the throw over, this looked like a deviation. The uptrend had been broken. We also got back underneath this support and resistance zone here, which, as you can see, has been key for reactions from price, dating all the way back to Coinbase's first listing in 2021 on the Nasdaq. When all of that came together, I thought this has to be the top. And earlier this year, I thought we were likely to see a bit of consolidation here before price ultimately rolls over. I did not expect, for full transparency, price to come back up and take out the all-time high in the way that it has done over the last month or so. But where that leaves us is in a place where the all-time high has been swept. We're being rejected from what is probably the last meaningful support and resistance zone for price. We're also being rejected at the upper boundary of this broadening megaphone top pattern that we've seen in the Nasdaq, that we've seen in Netflix, and is potentially happening here on a slightly different timescale to Netflix. I believe that the market has topped. I think we might consolidate here for a couple of weeks, and you might see, even a pullback towards the highs, but ultimately I think price is going to roll over. And by the time it's said and done, and remember that I said this, guys, because people do not believe that Coinbase could get anywhere near $5 or $6 in 2027. But remember, I'm telling you now, when this market eventually rolls over, all sorts of things are going to come out the closet. As the Bitcoin market suffers a collapse, and we'll come on to the Bitcoin chart in a second, I think there are going to be major questions asked about Coinbase's business model, about its viability moving forward. And it's funny how these things play out, because right now this looks like a strong business with Bitcoin trading at all-time highs. I know the results were a bit of a disappointment last week, which is, obviously in no small part why we got this huge red candle on the weekly. But for most people, Coinbase looks like the absolute darling of the crypto space, and a stock that if you're bullish on Bitcoin and crypto, you would expect to continue going up significantly for years to come. Nobody is predicting the kind of price action that I am, and it looks impossible right now. But I suppose my contention is that as this price unfolds, lots of things are going to become clear about Coinbase and the crypto ecosystem that will look really, really ugly. And I believe by the time we get down here, lots of people will fear that Coinbase might be bankrupt and might be going to zero. And I remember similar sentiment here, particularly after we bottomed here and then we spent months going sideways before coming down and taking out these lows. There was lots of talk about whether Coinbase would even exist in the future, potential bankruptcy, and people were really, really scared down here. And I think that we're going to see something similar down here. Now, what I think happens as we reach this $5 to $6 zone is that if you're smart and you're greedy, when max fear hits the market, instead of worrying about bankruptcy, I will be going all in. And I think that will be a life-changing investment opportunity, because I think eventually we go back to the highs and eventually much, much higher than the $430 region that has capped price to date. So short term, massively bearish on Coinbase and the crypto ecosystem. But long term, I will be keeping some cash on the sidelines, and I will be as greedy as anyone has ever been if price comes into this region in 2027. And here is the Bitcoin chart. This is probably the chart that I'm most famous for, and I've posted this lots of times, so I'm not going to talk through it. But what I did want to do today is just flash up the RSI. Now look, the RSI is not a foolproof indicator, but on higher time frames, this really does give you a sense of where momentum is. And this will be, what we've seen in July has been the third time that price has closed higher, has made a higher high relative to the previous high, while the RSI has made a lower high. And what that means for me is that momentum is starting to wane, because every time the price makes a high, the RSI seems to make a lower high. And I just think that is just one sign as we head into this sort of macro resistance here, the upper boundary of this sort of megaphone consolidation pattern. I think it's just another sign that momentum is waning. Everybody is bullish. Genuinely, you really struggle to find a single person on X, a single analyst on YouTube who is big in the crypto space that is anything other than a mega bull on Bitcoin right now. And let's remind ourselves where we are. Bitcoin bottomed here in the 15 to 16k region and has done nearly 700% from bottom to top. And so the people who are saying this is just the beginning, Bitcoin's going to $500,000, $1 million this year, I think you're ignoring massive risks in the broader market, in the bond market, in the equity market. But B, I honestly just can't see why you would be bullish. Now, if we make a clean break above this, fine. Maybe there's an argument on a higher time frame if the 2 weekly or the monthly chart we were holding up here, maybe there's an argument that we're going to see more upside. But is this really the place to be bullish? In my view, no. And I am betting that the market is about to roll over and follow the Nasdaq and the equity market into a huge decline that barely anybody can see coming. And there's a bit more evidence of that. So the other thing that really annoys me is that a couple of weeks ago, I started to get really bullish on miners. And the reason why was primarily this Riot chart here, because if you look back, every time that we've seen a massive breakout, and we saw one here where this trend line held as resistance for a long time, and we got this breakout in September 17, and price was at $4. By December, price was at 47. So we saw a 10x return in the space of about 3 months. And here, this was even more pronounced. So we broke this pattern here in summer of 2020, and then we retested the breakout in October. And then look what happened from $2.50 up into the $78 region. So again, something like a 30x move to the upside on Riot. And then I started to see that this consolidation was coming to an end, and we had broken out of this downtrend just as I believe the crypto market was topping. But the fact that Bitcoin has gone on to new highs over the last couple of years, but Riot has been trending sideways and consolidating here, led me to believe that maybe miners were the catch-up play. But look what's happened. And I won't lie, I took a fairly significant hit on this trade. I traded the breakout, we got back under, I got out, and prices continued to decline. And you can see that this uptrend here, which has held price steady all the way back until since April, seems to have been tested one too many times, and I think is on the verge of breaking down. And in my experience, when you see a false breakout like this, price can quite rapidly reverse in the opposite direction. So like me, lots of people on X were really bullish about this breakout and were comparing it to some of the price action that we've seen in 2017 and again in 2020. But I just think at the moment, unless we get back above these highs here and start to hold, potentially we'll see a move up into this region. But I don't think this looks pretty at all. And given my view on the Nasdaq and equities and Bitcoin, I think there is reason to be really, really worried if you're an investor in mining stocks. So this blue squiggle is what I'm expecting to play out if I'm right about Bitcoin and equities and the Nasdaq topping out. And like I say, it's going to get really ugly. I know people will think that I'm overly bearish, and I get criticized a lot for projecting some of these big moves. But that's how some of these stocks actually work. If you grab the top, I mean, look at this. This was a 99% decline from top to bottom, taking the 2017 high all the way into the COVID lows. And again, look at this. Even from 2021 into 2022, again, a 96% decline. So is it completely out of the realms of possibility that we see a pullback like this, which sees price decline by 95, 96, 97%? Of course it's not, because just in the last decade, we've seen 2 of those moves alone. And if you go back, even further, you'll see there are many, many more of these big moves to the downside. Riot and some of these crypto stocks tend to have really explosive moves in both directions. And I think we are in the early stages of a bearish one that will take price to new lows, potentially into the 30 cents region. So that's my view, right? On Coinbase, Riot, they look very similar, and they're backed up by some of my analysis on Bitcoin. Let's take a look at the altcoin market. Again, I think we're in the final throes. Lots of people are really excited. Price is sandwiched between these 2 big support and resistance zones on something like XRP. And I know everybody thinks that this is an SR flip and that we're breaking out and price is about to boom to $10 at least. I don't believe that's the case. I think we are in the final throes. We could come back up and make one more high into the sort of $4 region, but I think these are the final throes of a big move up, and all of this inefficiency underneath is going to get eaten away. I actually believe, I know people will think I'm crazy for saying this, but I actually believe some of these are going to zero. And if I were to look at this on the monthly, I think my first target would definitely be down here at the bottom of this, and one possibility is that this is just a massive range and that we come from here, we come back into the low of the range, we consolidate, and that in years to come this goes much higher. Another possibility is that this is some sort of wick-off distribution, and this is the UTAD, and look that up on Google if you're confused, and at the end of this distribution we see a big spike followed by a massive decline. So I'm not saying price will get there. I feel pretty confident that we will come back to these range lows here in the 10 to 12 cents region. But the thing I have to ask myself is if Bitcoin is going to get hit, 97, 98% over the next couple of years, I suspect alts are going to get hit harder. And so maybe this range low won't do it. And maybe if we come back and we retest this zone again and this support here gives way at 10 to 12 cents, my goodness, all of this massive inefficiency down here is there for the taking and could potentially get filled. So these are dangerous times if you're an altcoin investor. I think as everybody is euphoric and unanimous about further upside, I would be very, very cautious. And I think something like XRP could get absolutely obliterated if Bitcoin has the kind of downturn that I think it will. Where are we with Ethereum? So you'll remember I said weeks ago that if we reclaim this $2,800 region, which is this huge SR zone here, that quite quickly we will see a rapid move to the highs. And we've had that. We've come back into the sort of $3,900 region, just a whisker away from $4,000. I do expect us to take out these highs. I think they're too clean. So I think we're going at least back up into 4,100, 4,200. We may even possibly take out the all-time high at 4,800, 4,900. But when that happens, I know lots of people believe that this is just the early stage of a huge blowout and that Ethereum is going to 10, 20,000. My targets are still very much to the downside. I think on a macro scale, we're going to see maybe a nominal new high, a rollover, this reclaim of this uptrend will fail, and ultimately price is going to completely collapse, fill in all of this inefficiency. Once we're back in this range down here, I've got three targets. The first is the top of that range, the mid-range, and the lower end of the range. And I know people will say I'm completely crazy. That's fine. But if Ethereum does come up into this region and Bitcoin is going to decline about 97%, then I definitely don't think that this is out of the realms of possibility. And I know these are big claims. I know people will say, well, how can you project a 97% move to the downside? I am just banking on the fact that these are the final throes of a massive bubble, and that eventually when the Nasdaq gives up, cryptocurrency is going to get obliterated. People can argue till they're blue in the face about Bitcoin being a risk on and a risk off asset. I just don't buy it. I think there's no evidence to suggest that Bitcoin performs well in a risk off market. And if the Nasdaq gets hit 75%, then God help crypto investors. I think it's going to get so bad for anybody holding Bitcoin, but even worse for people holding altcoins. And what would that look like on the ETH BTC pair? I've said for a while now that I was the person that called this level when ETH BTC was up here and everybody was still calling for alt season. Now we've had the rally from the lows. My base case is that we're going to see more consolidation that will maybe push higher a little bit over the coming weeks, but ultimately roll back over, come and take out these lows as Bitcoin goes into decline. And we'll see some consolidation here before we break this big downtrend, and this will start to look like a sort of bump and run pattern. Now the exception to that would be if this green scenario plays out, if we started to hold on the daily above this huge downtrend, then I think we could see really significant upside for ETH BTC. I don't expect that to play out, so we will have to come back and view this chart over the next few weeks to see what unfolds. But my base case, like I say, is that price is going to roll over and come back to the lows on ETH BTC. And look, just one final piece of evidence that we are not on the brink of alt season. I've pointed to this chart before, but huge distribution here on Sol BTC. Unless we get a reclaim of this level here, frankly, it's good night for Sol BTC. So I don't know, anybody that's calling for alt season, you're just not looking at the same charts as me. I do think in the short term, there might be opportunities over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And one of the coins that I like, I've talked about quite a lot, is DOGE. Look at this breakout from this descending broadening wedge. Look at this retest here, both of this horizontal support and this diagonal downtrend break. This hasn't taken out the highs. And I think if you look at the 3-day chart, I think there's reason to believe that this could pump really, really hard in a kind of final phase of the bull market, similar to what we saw here, where in the space of just a few weeks, price went parabolic and went from 6 cents all the way up into the 70 cents region. I think a 3-4x move on this is definitely not out of the question before Bitcoin rolls over. So I hope some of that is useful. If you want more on global markets, on crypto, if you're interested in my views, then please do follow me through @PartTimeCharts and do hit the subscribe button. I hope some of that is useful. I know it's bleak, but better to be prepared. When the whole world is bullish and everybody is mocking the bears, I suspect that might be a decent time to be thinking about taking a counter position. And yes, I will be trying to milk some of these final moves in the cryptocurrency market from a trading perspective, but I will also be preparing myself for the end, which I expect will play out in the next 4, 6, potentially 8 weeks. Have a great week. Thank you for staying with me for some of my musings, my ramblings on a Monday. Look forward to being back with you all soon. Take care.